March 15, 2023. Agua Dulce Ranch, California. Ford Harrison had worked with bulls for 40 years. He knew their tells, their triggers, their breaking points. That's exactly why someone paid the handler $25,000 to remove the safety restraints. Thunder weighed 2,200 pounds of pure rage. Ford walked into that pen thinking it was just another day coordinating stunts. The bull charged. Ford went down, 3 ribs cracked, lung punctured. What happened in the next 40 to 8 hours changed everything Ford thought he knew about his past. The hospital called it a freak accident. The insurance company filed it under occupational hazard, but the envelope slipped under his door while he was unconscious told a different story. Someone had been planning this for 36 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morphine made everything soft around the edges, but Ford's hand still shook as he turned the manila envelope over in his lap. No postmark, no return address. Just his name written in block letters across cream-colored paper that felt expensive between his fingers. The hospital room smelled like disinfectant and dying flowers. Outside his window, the San Fernando Valley stretched toward the mountains, brown and exhausted under the March sun. Ford had been staring at those hills for 2 days, trying to piece together what had gone wrong with Thunder. Bulls didn't just snap their restraints. Not the hydraulic ones they used on big productions. Someone had knocked on his door while he was unconscious, slipped this envelope underneath while the nurses were changing shifts. The security cameras in this wing had been down for maintenance, convenient timing that made Ford's skin crawl. He'd opened it 3 times already. Each time the contents made less sense and more sense simultaneously, like looking at an optical illusion that shifted depending on how you focused your eyes. Inside, a single photograph, black and white, slightly yellowed at the edges. A young woman with dark hair and bright eyes, maybe 22 or 23, wearing a cowgirl outfit that looked authentic rather than costume department authentic. She was smiling, but there was something in her expression, a wariness around the eyes that suggested she knew something was coming. Ford knew that face. He'd been trying to forget it for 36 years. Rebecca Martinez, the actress who died on his watch in 1987, during what should have been a routine bull riding sequence for a low-budget western called Desert Thunder, the accident that ended his career in major motion pictures and sent him scrambling for work on indie films and regional commercials for the rest of his professional life. But this wasn't a photograph from the film. This was personal, intimate. Rebecca sitting on what looked like a porch swing, wearing civilian clothes, laughing at something outside the frame. The kind of photo a boyfriend might take, or a family member during a quiet moment. Ford flipped it over. Written in the same block letters as his name on the envelope, she knew what you did. The heart monitor beside his bed picked up pace, beeping faster as his pulse climbed. Ford forced himself to breathe slowly through his nose, the way his old meditation instructor had taught him back when he still thought therapy might help with the nightmares. Rebecca Martinez had died because of his negligence. That was the official story, the one that had satisfied the insurance investigators and the studio executives who needed someone to blame. Ford had miscalculated the bull's temperament, failed to account for the animal's stress level after a long day of filming, made a rookie mistake that cost a young actress her life. He'd believed that story himself for decades, carried the guilt like a stone in his chest, let it poison every relationship and sabotage every opportunity that came his way afterward. The bottle became his closest friend, and small-town productions became his penance. But someone thought he'd done something worse than make a mistake. Ford's phone buzzed on the bedside table. Text message from an unknown number. Check your email. His laptop was in the small closet where they'd stored his personal effects. Ford struggled out of bed, his ribs screaming in protest, and retrieved it with shaking hands. The Wi-Fi password was taped to the back of the television remote. A small mercy in a day full of unpleasant surprises. One new email, from a Gmail account that was just a string of random numbers. No subject line. The message contained only a link to a cloud storage folder. Ford hesitated. Whoever had orchestrated the bull attack, and he was now certain it had been orchestrated, wanted him to see something. This felt like a trap, but it was a trap he couldn't avoid springing. The alternative was spending the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, wondering when the next accident would find him. He clicked the link. The folder contained dozens of photographs. Rebecca Martinez at various ages, from childhood through her early 20s. Rebecca with an older woman who shared her features, probably her mother. Rebecca at what looked like a quinceañera, wearing a pink dress and a radiant smile. Rebecca on horseback, demonstrating the riding skills that had gotten her cast in Desert Thunder. And then, at the bottom of the folder, a video file dated March 23, 1987. 3 days before Rebecca died. Ford's finger hovered over the play button. Whatever was on this recording, it was going to change everything. The sender had waited 36 years to share it, had orchestrated an attack that could have killed him just to get his attention. This wasn't about justice or closure or any of the other noble motivations people claimed when they dredged up old tragedies. This was about revenge. Ford clicked play, and Rebecca Martinez began speaking to him from beyond the grave. The video quality was grainy, the kind you got from handheld cameras in the 80s. Rebecca Martinez sat in what looked like a motel room, wearing a faded denim jacket over a white t-shirt. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and without the stage makeup, she looked younger than her 23 years. Vulnerable. "I don't know if anyone will ever see this," she said, glancing nervously at something off camera. "But if something happens to me on this movie, I want people to know it wasn't an accident." Ford's breath caught in his throat. The heart monitor's beeping accelerated again, but he barely heard it over the rush of blood in his ears. "Ford Harrison knows," Rebecca continued. "He has to know. The bull sequences aren't safe. I've told him 3 times that Thunder gets agitated when they use the air horns to make him buck harder. But the director wants more aggressive footage, and Ford just keeps pushing the safety margins." She stood up and walked closer to the camera, her face filling more of the frame. Ford could see the fear in her eyes now, mixed with something that looked like resignation. "My mom always said I worry too much. Maybe she's right. Maybe I'm being paranoid because this is my first big break and I don't want to screw it up." Rebecca's voice cracked slightly. "But if something goes wrong tomorrow, if Thunder hurts someone, I want it on record that we all saw it coming." The video ended. Ford closed the laptop with trembling hands and stared at the blank screen. In all his years of carrying guilt over Rebecca's death, he'd never imagined she'd been afraid of him, afraid of his choices. He'd convinced himself that the accident had been unpredictable, a tragic convergence of circumstances that no one could have prevented. Rebecca had tried to prevent it. She'd warned him about Thunder's specific triggers, and he'd ignored her because a 23-year-old actress challenging the judgment of Hollywood's most celebrated stunt coordinator had seemed presumptuous, ungrateful even. The morphine was wearing off and physical pain was creeping back into his awareness. The deep ache in his ribs where Thunder's hooves had connected, the burning along his left shoulder where the bull's horn had torn through muscle. But those injuries felt insignificant compared to the weight of what he'd just learned. Ford had killed Rebecca Martinez through arrogance and negligence, but someone else knew about it. Someone who'd been watching him for 36 years, collecting evidence, waiting for the right moment to destroy what remained of his life. His phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. "Meet me at the Desert Rose Diner on Route 66 tomorrow at noon. Come alone." Ford typed back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. Someone who loved her. Ford set the phone down and looked out the window again. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the valley in shades of amber and rust that reminded him of the New Mexico locations where he'd been working for the past 15 years. Small productions, independent films, regional commercials for car dealerships and furniture stores. A steady descent from the A-list movies that had once made him famous. He'd told himself it was a choice, that he preferred the intimacy of smaller crews, the creative freedom that came with lower budgets. But the truth was simpler and more pathetic. After Rebecca's death, no major studio would hire him. His reputation was poisoned, his confidence shattered. The indie circuit was all he had left, and now even that might be gone. A nurse knocked on his door, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who'd been checking on him every few hours since the surgery. She carried a small paper cup filled with pills. "How are we feeling, Mr. Harrison?" she asked, setting the cup on his bedside table next to a glass of water. Like I got trampled by a 2,000-pound bull, Ford replied, attempting humor to deflect from the panic clawing at his chest. The nurse smiled sympathetically. The doctor wants to keep you one more night for observation, but you should be able to go home tomorrow morning. Do you have someone who can pick you up? Ford considered the question. His ex-wife lived in Oregon and hadn't spoken to him in 8 years. His daughter had stopped returning his calls after his last relapse. His closest friend was probably Miguel Santos, the gaffer on his most recent film, but Miguel had his own family to worry about. I'll manage, Ford said. After the nurse left, Ford took his pain medication and lay back against the pillows, trying to make sense of the day's revelations. Someone who loved Rebecca Martinez had been stalking him for decades. They'd somehow sabotaged the hydraulic restraints on Thunder, nearly killing him in the process. They had intimate photographs of Rebecca and a video confession that painted Ford as negligent at best, criminally reckless at worst. Tomorrow, he would have to face them. Outside his window, the lights of Los Angeles began to twinkle in the gathering darkness, and Ford Harrison closed his eyes against the weight of 36 years of buried truth. Ford's eyes snapped open to the sound of his phone ringing. The hospital room was dark except for the pale green glow of medical equipment and the amber wash of parking lot lights bleeding through the window blinds. The digital clock on the bedside table read 2:47 a.m. The caller ID showed unknown, but Ford already knew who it would be. His hand shook slightly as he answered. Hello, Ford. The voice was older, weathered by years and grief, but unmistakably feminine. I've been waiting a long time to talk to you. Ford sat up straighter, ignoring the sharp protest from his ribs. Who is this? My name is Carmen Martinez. Rebecca was my daughter. The words hit Ford like a physical blow. In 36 years of carrying guilt over Rebecca's death, he'd never spoken directly to her family. The studio lawyers had handled everything after the funeral. Settlements, non-disclosure agreements, insurance payouts. Ford had wanted to reach out, to apologize, but his own legal counsel had advised against it. Mrs. Martinez, he began, but she cut him off. Carmen, and before you start with your apologies, I want you to listen. Really listen, for once in your miserable life. Ford closed his eyes. I'm listening. Rebecca called me the night before she died. She was scared, Ford. Scared of you, scared of that bull, scared of what was going to happen on set the next day. She wanted to quit the movie, but I told her she was being foolish, that this was her big break, her chance to make something of herself. Carmen's voice cracked. I told my baby girl to trust the professionals, to trust you. The heart monitor beside Ford's bed began beeping faster. He pressed his free hand against his forehead, feeling the weight of decades crashing down on him. I've spent 36 years hating myself for that phone call, Carmen continued. But I've spent even longer hating you for ignoring her warnings, for being so goddamn arrogant that you couldn't listen to a young woman who knew that bull better than anyone. I didn't know. Ford started. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. Carmen's voice hardened. Do you know what Rebecca told me that last night? She said you'd been drinking on set. Not drunk, but drinking. Taking little nips from a flask between setups. She could smell it on you. Ford's stomach lurched. He remembered that day now, the pressure from the director to get more dramatic footage, the way Thunder had been agitated from the morning's rehearsals. He remembered the small silver flask in his jacket pocket, a gift from his then-wife that he'd started carrying for luck. Just small sips to steady his nerves, to maintain the confidence that had made him Hollywood's most sought-after stunt coordinator. Rebecca wanted to report it, Carmen said, but she was afraid it would ruin her career before it started. A young Latina actress accusing the great Ford Harrison of being unprofessional? Who would have believed her? Why are you telling me this now? Ford asked, though he already knew the answer. Because I'm dying, Ford. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. I have maybe 2 months left, and I refuse to meet my daughter in the next life knowing that her killer walked free. The word hung in the air between them like a blade. Killer. It was an accident, Ford whispered. But the words felt hollow even to him. Was it? Because I have security footage from the motel where Rebecca was staying. Footage of you visiting her room the night before she died. Footage of you leaving 45 minutes later, looking angry, real angry. Ford's blood turned to ice. The memory came flooding back, not fragmented like the others, but crystal clear. He'd gone to Rebecca's motel room to discuss her concerns about Thunder, to reassure her that everything would be fine. But she'd confronted him about the drinking, had threatened to talk to the producers if he didn't remove himself from the bull sequences. They'd argued. Ford had accused her of being unprofessional, of trying to undermine his authority. Rebecca had stood her ground, her dark eyes flashing with the same fierce determination he'd seen in the video. She'd told him she wouldn't be responsible for someone getting hurt because of his recklessness. "I can see you remember now," Carmen said softly. "She stood up to you that night, didn't she? Told you she was going to report your drinking if you didn't step aside." Ford's hand tightened on the phone. "She was threatening my career, and you decided hers was worth less than yours." The accusation hit like a physical blow because Ford could no longer deny its truth. The next morning, he'd made sure Rebecca was in the ring with Thunder. He'd ignored the safety protocols she'd outlined, had used the air horns despite her specific warnings. When the bull had charged, when the restraints had failed, Ford had told himself it was tragic but unavoidable. But he'd wanted to teach her a lesson about challenging authority. He just hadn't intended for the lesson to be fatal. "The meeting tomorrow," Ford said quietly. "What do you want?" "Justice," Carmen replied. Finally, the line went dead, leaving Ford staring at his phone in the pre-dawn darkness. His hands trembled as he set it aside, the weight of Carmen's words settling over him like concrete. Justice. After 36 years, Rebecca's mother wanted justice. Ford pushed himself out of bed, his ribs screaming in protest. He needed air, needed space, needed anything but the suffocating walls of this hospital room where the truth had finally cornered him. The hallway outside was dimly lit, patrolled by a single night nurse who glanced up from her station with mild concern. "Mr. Harrison? Is everything all right?" "Just restless," he managed, forcing what he hoped was a reassuring smile. "Thought I'd walk a bit." She nodded, returning to her paperwork, and Ford shuffled toward the elevator bank. He needed to think, to figure out how to handle tomorrow's meeting. Carmen Martinez had been planning this confrontation for decades, collecting evidence while Ford convinced himself he was just another victim of a tragic accident. The elevator arrived empty, and Ford pressed the button for the roof access. Most hospitals kept their rooftops locked, but he'd learned during his first suicide attempt 15 years ago that maintenance doors were often left unsecured during night shifts. Some habits from his darkest period died hard. The door opened with a soft click, and Ford stepped onto the graveled surface. Los Angeles spread out below him, a grid of lights that seemed to mock his isolation. Somewhere out there, Carmen Martinez was dying of cancer, spending her final weeks orchestrating his downfall. Somewhere else, the crew from his latest film was probably wondering why their stunt coordinator had been attacked by a bull that had never shown aggression before. Ford's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but he knew it wasn't Carmen this time. The message was simple: "We need to talk." He recognized the area code. 505 New Mexico. Someone from the film set. Before he could respond, another text arrived. "Don't go to that meeting tomorrow, please." Ford typed back, "Who is this?" The response came quickly, "Miguel Santos, and I think I know what really happened with Thunder." Miguel, the gaffer who'd been working with Ford for 3 years, ever since Ford had started taking jobs in New Mexico. A quiet man with steady hands and kind eyes who'd never once mentioned the Rebecca Martinez incident, though he had to know about it. Everyone in the industry knew about it. Ford's phone rang. Miguel's voice was strained, exhausted. "Ford, thank God you answered. I've been up all night thinking about what happened with Thunder. Something's not right." "Miguel, what are you talking about?" "The restraints. I helped install them yesterday morning and they were solid. Industrial grade, rated for animals twice Thunder's size. There's no way they should have failed unless..." "Unless what?" A long pause. "Unless someone tampered with them." Ford closed his eyes. Who else was around the equipment? That's just it. After we finished the setup, this woman showed up. Said she was from animal welfare, wanted to inspect our safety measures. I thought it was weird because we'd already been cleared by the state inspector, but she had credentials. Official-looking badge, clipboard, The whole thing. What did she look like? Older, maybe 65, gray hair, thin. She spent about 20 minutes checking everything, asked a lot of questions about Thunder's temperament, real professional. But now that I think about it, Miguel's voice trailed off. What? She looked familiar, like maybe I'd seen her picture somewhere before. Ford's blood chilled. Miguel, I need you to do something for me. Google Rebecca Martinez actress 1987. Look at the family photos from her funeral. Another pause, longer this time. Ford could hear keyboard clicking through the phone. Jesus Christ, Miguel whispered. Ford, that's her. That's the woman who inspected our equipment. She looks older, but it's definitely her. Her mother, Ford said quietly. Carmen Martinez. The dead actress's mother sabotaged our safety equipment? But why? I mean, you weren't even supposed to be in the ring with Thunder. That was supposed to be Jake's stunt. Ford remembered now. Jake Morrison, the young stunt double who'd called in sick that morning with food poisoning. Ford had stepped in at the last minute, not wanting to delay the shoot. Another coincidence that suddenly felt much less coincidental. Miguel, I need you to stay away from the set tomorrow. In fact, maybe take a few days off. Ford, what's going on? This woman, she could have killed you. Hell, she could have killed any of us if Thunder had broken out of the ring entirely. That was the thing Ford was beginning to understand. Carmen Martinez was dying, and dying people had nothing left to lose. She'd spent decades planning this revenge, and she wasn't going to let collateral damage stop her from seeing it through. Just stay safe, Ford said. And Miguel, don't tell anyone about this conversation. After hanging up with Miguel, Ford remained on the hospital rooftop until dawn painted the sky bruised purple. The revelation that Carmen had poisoned Jake Morrison, because it had to be her, another piece of her elaborate revenge, left him hollow. An innocent kid laid up with food poisoning so Ford would be forced into Thunder's ring. Every detail orchestrated with surgical precision. Back in his room, Ford discharged himself against medical advice. The duty nurse protested, citing infection risks and the need for observation, but Ford signed the liability waivers with hands that barely shook anymore. Shock, maybe, or simply the weight of finally knowing the truth. The Desert Rose Diner squatted beside Route 66 like something from another era, all chrome and cracked vinyl that had seen better decades. Ford arrived 20 minutes early and chose a corner booth facing the entrance. The waitress, a tired woman with kind eyes, brought coffee without being asked. He didn't touch it. Carmen Martinez walked through the door at exactly noon. The cancer had eaten her down to bone and determination, but her eyes burned with the same fierce intelligence Ford remembered from Rebecca's face that last night in the motel room. She wore a simple black dress that hung loose on her diminished frame and carried a manila envelope thick with papers. Ford. She slid into the booth across from him, moving carefully as if her skeleton might collapse. You look like hell. You tried to kill me. I tried to hurt you the way you hurt my daughter. The way you've been hurting for 36 years. Drinking yourself to sleep every night, taking smaller and smaller jobs until you're coordinating stunts for car commercials in Albuquerque. Carmen's voice was steady, surgical. But killing you would be mercy, and you don't deserve mercy. She opened the envelope and spread photographs across the stained Formica table. Ford recognized them immediately. Rebecca in the motel room that final night, but from angles impossible unless someone had been inside, hidden. His stomach lurched as he realized what he was seeing. My daughter was wearing a wire, Ford. One of those little digital recorders actors use to practice lines. She turned it on when you came to her room because she was scared of you. Scared of what you might do if she followed through on her threat. Ford stared at a photograph showing him grabbing Rebecca's wrist, his face twisted with alcohol-fueled anger. In another, she was backing against the wall, fear obvious in her posture. Pictures that would look like assault to anyone who didn't know the context. She kept that recorder running right up until Thunder killed her, Carmen continued. 43 minutes of you threatening my baby, telling her she'd never work in Hollywood again if she crossed you. Promising to make sure she got the most dangerous assignments until she learned her place. That's not, I didn't mean, listen. Carmen produced a small digital player and pressed play. Ford's own voice filled the space between them, slurred with whiskey and venom. You think you can threaten me, you little bitch? I'll put you in that ring with Thunder myself. See how tough you are when you're facing down 2,000 pounds of pissed-off bull. Ford's coffee cup slipped from numb fingers, shattering against the floor. The waitress hurried over with a mop, and Carmen paused the recording until they were alone again. "I've been carrying that for 36 years, she said, waiting for the right moment. The statute of limitations ran out on murder charges, but the court of public opinion never forgets, especially when it comes to powerful men threatening young women. What do you want?" Ford's voice came out as a whisper. Carmen slid a single sheet of paper across the table, a confession, typed and waiting for his signature. It detailed everything: the drinking, the threats, his deliberate decision to put Rebecca in the ring despite knowing Thunder's triggers. The document painted him as a predator who'd used his position to silence a young actress's safety concerns, ultimately causing her death through criminal negligence. "Sign it, and I'll make sure the recording and photos are released after I'm dead. You'll have maybe 6 weeks to prepare for the fallout. Refuse, and everything goes public today. TMZ, Variety, the Los Angeles Times. By tomorrow morning, every person in America will know exactly what kind of monster you are." Ford stared at the confession. Signing it would destroy whatever was left of his career, his reputation, any hope of reconciliation with his daughter. But refusing meant immediate annihilation, and Carmen's cancer-ravaged face told him she was past the point of bluffing. "She loved movies," Carmen said softly. "Ever since she was little, Rebecca wanted to be part of that magic. She died believing Hollywood was full of people like you, predators who'd destroy anyone who challenged them." Ford picked up the pen with trembling fingers. "I never meant for her to die." "But you didn't care if she did," Carmen replied. "And that's the same thing." As Ford signed his name, sealing his fate, he finally understood the true cost of his silence. Rebecca Martinez had died twice, once in Thunder's ring, and again in his 36 years of self-serving lies. The pen fell from Ford's hand as Carmen folded the signed confession with satisfaction. But as she tucked it into her purse, Ford's mind caught on something that had been bothering him since Miguel's call. "Wait." Ford's voice was hoarse. "You said Rebecca was wearing a wire that night, a digital recorder. I told you—" "No." Ford straightened, his ribs protesting. "You said she turned it on when I came to her room because she was scared. But how would you know that unless—" The realization hit him like a physical blow. "Unless you told her to record me." Carmen's hands stilled on her purse clasp. For the first time since entering the diner, her composure wavered. "You knew I was coming to see her that night," Ford continued, his voice gaining strength. "Rebecca didn't just happen to have a recorder running. You planned it. You told her to confront me about the drinking, knowing I'd react badly, knowing I'd threaten her. That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Ford leaned forward. A scared 19-year-old actress doesn't wire herself for a conversation with a stunt coordinator unless someone convinces her it's necessary, unless someone tells her exactly how dangerous that conversation might become. Carmen's cancer-ravaged face had gone pale, but her eyes still burned with defiance. "You're grasping at straws." "Am I?" "Because I'm starting to remember things differently now." Ford's mind was racing, pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. Rebecca knew specific details about Thunder's triggers that weren't in any of the production notes. Information about air horns, about his reaction to sudden movements. How would a young actress know those things, unless someone who'd researched the animal extensively told her exactly what to say? She was thorough. She was coached. Ford's voice cut through her protest. "By you. You'd been planning this for months, maybe years. You found out I was working with bulls again, tracked down the production, and got your daughter cast in the film. Then you fed her the safety concerns, told her to confront me, made sure she had evidence of my reaction." Carmen's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. "You're delusional." "The motel room photos," Ford pressed on. "Those angles, the positioning, someone had to be there, hidden. Someone who knew exactly where the conversation would take place because they'd arranged it." He paused, studying her face. "You were there, weren't you? In the bathroom or the closet, watching your teenage daughter face down a drunk, angry man you deliberately provoked." "Stop. You used her as bait, Carmen, your own daughter. You turned her into a weapon for your revenge, and when I put her in that ring the next morning, you got exactly what you'd orchestrated." "Stop!" Carmen's scream echoed through the diner, causing heads to turn. The waitress took a step toward their table, but Carmen waved her away with a shaking hand. "You used your daughter's death to justify 36 years of planning my destruction," Ford said quietly. "But she didn't have to die, did she? You could have pulled her from the film the moment you had the recording. You had what you needed to destroy me. But that wasn't enough. You wanted me to actually kill her." Tears were streaming down Carmen's hollow cheeks now. She wasn't supposed to get hurt. The safety equipment was supposed to hold. Thunder was supposed to charge and stop, maybe knock her down. Scare her, I never thought. You sabotaged the restraints, hoping I'd be gored to death. And when it was Rebecca instead, you spent 4 decades convincing yourself it was justice. Ford felt something cold settling in his chest. But it wasn't justice, was it? It was a mother sacrificing her child for revenge. Carmen's voice came out as a broken whisper. She volunteered. "When I told her what you'd done to other young actresses, what you might do again if someone didn't stop you." "What I'd done to other actresses." Ford stared at her. "Carmen, I never—" "Rebecca was the first person who ever confronted me about my drinking. There were no other victims, because there was no pattern to stop." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Carmen's face had crumpled, and Ford could see the weight of decades crashing down on her just as it had on him. "You invented a monster to justify creating one," he said softly. "You told your daughter stories about my past victims that never existed, convinced her she was saving future lives by risking her own. And when your plan went wrong, when she died instead of me, you spent 36 years telling yourself it was my fault." Carmen Martinez, the grieving mother who'd haunted his nightmares for decades, looked suddenly small and broken in the diner booth. The woman who'd orchestrated elaborate revenge, who'd sabotaged equipment and poisoned innocent crew members, had been running from a truth more devastating than any Ford had been hiding. She hadn't just failed to protect her daughter. She'd murdered her. The confession lay between them like a corpse, Ford's signature still wet on the paper that would destroy what remained of his life. But the words hung in the air now, impossible to take back. She'd murdered her. Carmen's breathing came in short, ragged gasps. Her skeletal hands clutched the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping her from drowning in 36 years of self-deception. The cancer eating through her body seemed merciful compared to the truth now consuming her soul. "No," she whispered. "No, I was protecting other girls. I was stopping a predator." "You were avenging your ex-husband." Ford's voice was steady now, pieces of a decades-old puzzle finally locking into place. "Rebecca's father. The reason you knew so much about Hollywood, about how to manipulate the system. He worked in the industry, didn't he?" Carmen's silence was answer enough. "Let me guess," Ford continued. "He left you for someone younger, an actress maybe? And you spent years watching him build a new life while you raised his daughter alone. When Rebecca decided she wanted to act, you saw your chance for payback. Not just against him, but against the entire system that had stolen your family. That's not—" Carmen's voice cracked. "I loved my daughter. You loved your revenge more." Ford pulled the photographs toward him, studying them with new eyes. "These weren't taken by a hidden camera. The angles are too clean, too professional. You hired someone, didn't you? A private investigator, maybe someone who owed you a favor, someone who could document my attack on your daughter while you watched from wherever you were hiding." Carmen's tears had stopped. In their place was something harder, more desperate. Rebecca believed in what we were doing. She understood the lies you told her. Ford's voice cut through her justification like a blade. About my fictional victims, about the other actresses I'd supposedly terrorized. You created an entire mythology around me, Carmen, made me into such a monster that your teenage daughter felt heroic confronting me. The diner had grown quiet around them. Even the kitchen sounds seemed muted, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Carmen reached for her purse with trembling hands, and for a moment Ford tensed, wondering what other weapons she might have prepared. Instead, she pulled out a second envelope, this one worn and yellowed with age. "These are real," she said. spilling more photographs onto the table. From Rebecca's funeral. Look at them, Ford. Look at what you're drinking cost the world. The images showed a devastated family, a closed casket surrounded by flowers, young actors Ford recognized from the production weeping openly. In one photo, Carmen herself stood beside the grave, supported by a man Ford now realized must be Rebecca's father, the ex-husband whose betrayal had set this entire tragedy in motion. But it was the last photograph that stopped Ford's heart. Rebecca alive, laughing on set just hours before her death. She was helping adjust safety equipment, her young face bright with the joy of being part of something magical. In the background, barely visible, was Thunder in his paddock, calm, docile. A gentle giant before Carmen's sabotage had turned him into an instrument of murder. She was happy, Ford said quietly. Right up until the end, she believed she was doing something noble. Don't. Carmen's voice was raw. Don't you dare make this about her innocence. You're the one who threatened her. You're the one who put her in that ring. After you spent months convincing her it was necessary. Ford looked up from the photographs. Tell me, Carmen, when did you first make contact with her? When did you start filling her head with stories about my supposed victims? The question hung between them like a blade. Carmen's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Ford could see the exact moment she realized the trap she'd built for herself, the way her carefully constructed narrative was crumbling under the weight of its own contradictions. It was before the film, wasn't it? Ford pressed. You didn't get her cast so she could expose me. You got me hired because she was already cast. You researched my background, found out about my drinking, and decided I'd make the perfect weapon for your revenge. A drunken has-been who could be provoked into threats, into dangerous behavior that would justify what came next. Carmen's confession came out as barely a whisper. 3 months. I'd been talking to her for 3 months before filming started. The waitress appeared beside their table, coffee pot in hand, but stopped when she saw their faces. Whatever she read there made her retreat quickly, leaving them alone with the weight of a truth that had taken 4 decades to surface. The recording, Ford said. Play the rest of it. No. Play it, Carmen. Let me hear my daughter's last words. Carmen's hand moved toward the digital player, then stopped. Because they both knew what the rest of that recording would reveal. Not just Ford's drunken threats, but Rebecca's coached responses, her careful questions designed to extract maximum incrimination. Evidence of a 19-year-old girl following her mother's script, even as she walked toward her own death. Carmen's finger hovered over the play button, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. The weight of 36 years pressed down on that single moment, decades of carefully constructed lies balanced on the edge of a digital cliff. Play it, Ford repeated, his voice carrying a quiet authority that hadn't been there since before Thunder's attack. Let me hear what you made her say. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Ford reached across the table, his scarred hand covering hers on the device. You coached a 19-year-old girl to manipulate a drunk, violent man. You told her exactly what buttons to push, what words to use, and when I reacted exactly as you predicted, you convinced her it proved everything you'd told her about me was true. Carmen tried to pull her hand away, but Ford held firm. Not roughly. There was no anger left in him now, only a terrible crystalline clarity. She trusted you completely, he continued. Her own mother. When you told her about my fictional victims, she believed every word. When you explained how dangerous I was, how many other young women would suffer if someone didn't stop me, she felt chosen, special, like she was saving the world. Rebecca was brave. Rebecca was murdered by the person who should have protected her. Ford's words fell into the space between them like stones into still water, creating ripples that would never stop spreading. And the worst part is, you've spent 4 decades convincing yourself you were the grieving mother instead of the killer. Carmen's face crumpled, but Ford wasn't finished. The truth had momentum now. 36 years of suppressed clarity demanding release. The safety equipment wasn't sabotaged randomly, was it? You knew exactly which cables to cut, which restraints to weaken, because you'd researched everything, the bulls, the rigging, even the insurance policies. You knew that if someone died during the stunt, the investigation would focus on mechanical failure and human error. My human error. Carmen's whispered yes was barely audible above the diner's ambient noise. "But you made one crucial mistake," Ford said, his thumb finding the play button on the recorder. "You assumed I'd put myself in that ring. The plan was for me to get gored, wasn't it? The drunk, abusive stunt coordinator killed by his own negligence. Perfect poetic justice." He pressed play. Rebecca's voice filled the space between them, young and earnest and heartbreakingly naive. "I know you don't want to hear this, Ford, but I have to ask about the safety protocols for tomorrow's sequence. My research suggests that bulls like Thunder can be triggered by specific environmental factors." Ford closed his eyes, hearing the barely covered slip. She'd almost said my mother before catching herself, following Carmen's script even in that moment of genuine concern. His own voice responded, slurred and defensive. "What research? You're an actress, not an animal behaviorist. I've been reading about previous incidents. There was a stunt coordinator in Texas who ignored safety warnings about a bull named Diablo. 3 people were hospitalized because he was too drunk to—" "That's enough." Ford reached over and stopped the playback. "There was no incident in Texas, was there? No bull named Diablo. You fed her a completely fabricated story to make her believe I had a pattern of dangerous behavior." Carmen's nod was barely perceptible. "And when she confronted me with your lies, when I reacted with exactly the kind of drunken anger you'd predicted, she became even more convinced you were right about me, even more determined to go through with the plan." Ford pulled the signed confession toward him, studying his own signature. The document that would destroy his reputation was based entirely on Carmen's orchestrated manipulation, yet every word of his recorded threats was real. He had been drunk. He had been angry. He had put Rebecca in that ring knowing Thunder was dangerous. "We're both killers, Carmen," he said quietly. "You created the weapon, and I pulled the trigger. The only difference is that you've spent 36 years telling yourself you were righteous, while I knew exactly what I was." Carmen finally looked up, her eyes hollow with the weight of collapsed denial. "She was so proud," she whispered. "The night before the stunt, she called me and said she felt like a real investigative journalist, like she was about to expose a terrible secret that would save countless other girls. And you let her believe it. I needed her to believe it. If she'd known the truth, that this was about my ex-husband, about my own need for revenge against an industry that had discarded me, she never would have gone through with it." Ford carefully folded the confession and placed it in his jacket pocket. Carmen watched with confusion, then growing alarm. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done 36 years ago," Ford said, standing slowly. His ribs protested, but he remained upright. "I'm calling the police." Carmen's face went white. "You can't. The statute of limitations ran out on your crime," Ford agreed, "but not on mine. And it's time I finally paid for what I did to your daughter." Ford pulled out his phone with steady hands, the weight of 36 years finally lifting from his shoulders. Carmen watched in stunned silence as he dialed 911, her cancer-ravaged face reflecting the same hollow acceptance he'd carried since that night in 1987. "This is Ford Harrison," he said when the operator answered. "I'm calling to report a murder that occurred 36 years ago. The victim was Rebecca Martinez, and I'm ready to confess." Carmen reached across the table, her skeletal fingers grasping at his wrist. "Ford, no. You don't understand what this will—" He gently moved her hand away, keeping the phone pressed to his ear as he gave the dispatcher the diner's address. When he hung up, the silence between them felt different. Not the charged tension of revelation, but something quieter. The exhausted peace that comes when all the lies finally die. "They'll be here soon," Ford said, settling back into the booth. "We have maybe 10 minutes before everything changes." Carmen stared at him with something that might have been wonder. "Why? After everything I've done to you, everything I've taken from you, why would you protect me?" Ford looked down at the photographs scattered across the table. Rebecca's bright smile, the funeral flowers, the decades of surveillance that had consumed Carmen's life. "I'm not protecting you. I'm protecting her memory. Rebecca died believing she was a hero. That's the only truth that matters now." Outside the diner windows, the New Mexico sun was setting behind the same red mesas where he'd spent 15 years hiding from himself. The landscape looked different now, less like a prison and more like the place where he'd finally learned the difference between guilt and shame, between punishment and justice. She would have been 55 next month, Carmen whispered. I used to imagine what she'd look like, whether she'd have children of her own. But I stopped doing that years ago. It hurt too much. She'd have been proud of you once, Ford said quietly. Before all this, when you were just her mother, before you turned yourself into something else. Carmen's laugh was bitter and broken. I don't even remember who I was before. The anger has been so much a part of me for so long, I don't know what's left underneath it. Ford understood that feeling. He'd lived with it for 36 years, the way guilt could hollow you out from the inside until you became nothing but a shell wrapped around your worst moment. But sitting here now, watching Carmen confront her own demons, he realized something had shifted. The weight was still there, would always be there, but it no longer felt like it was crushing him. You still have time, he told her. Not much, but some. You could choose to spend what's left remembering the daughter you loved instead of the revenge you built around her death. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Carmen looked toward the sound with the resigned expression of someone who'd been waiting decades for this moment without knowing it. Will you tell them about my part in it? She asked. Ford considered the question. If they ask directly, I won't lie, but I'm not going to volunteer information that would put a dying woman in prison for her final months. Rebecca's been gone for 36 years. Destroying you too won't bring her back. The police cars pulled into the parking lot just as the last light faded from the western sky. Through the diner windows, Ford could see officers emerging from their vehicles, moving with the careful efficiency of people responding to a reported crime. In a few minutes, he would tell them everything, about the drinking, the threats, the moment he'd put a 19-year-old girl into a ring with a bull he knew was dangerous. He would not tell them about Carmen's orchestration, about the lies and manipulation that had led to that moment. Some truths were too devastating to serve any purpose beyond destruction, and there had been enough destruction already. Ford, Carmen said as the officers approached the diner entrance. I'm sorry, for all of it. For what I did to her, what I did to you. For the 36 years I stole from both of us. Ford nodded, watching the uniformed figures through the glass. I know. I'm sorry too. When the officers entered the diner, Ford Harrison stood to meet them with the same quiet dignity he'd once brought to coordinating stunts. Careful, deliberate, ready to take responsibility for the consequences of his actions. Outside, the New Mexico desert stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars, beautiful and harsh and eternally unchanged. For the first time since 1987, Ford felt like he was finally home.